Okay, so we have come back to ring theory, and today we are going to see a particular Euclidean ring. If you recall, last time we actually developed the theory of Euclidean rings. So now we are going to see the Euclidean ring of Gaussian integers. The great mathematician Carl Friedrich Gauss invented this ring, and in this ring what we will do, we are going to apply the theory of our Euclidean rings to this particular Euclidean ring, and then that will enable us to prove a theorem from number theory about prime numbers due to mathematician Fermat. So let us see what this thing is about. Let Ji denote the set of all complex numbers A plus Bi, where A and B are in the set of integers. That's why we are putting J here. For us, J is the set of integers. The other and more popular notation is this. So according to that notation, we would write like this. Anyway, Herstein has written J, so we are going to stick with that. So here Ji is the set of all complex numbers whose real and imaginary parts are integers. Such complex numbers are called Gaussian integers, named after Carl Friedrich Gauss. Okay. Under ordinary addition and multiplication, of complex numbers, the Gaussian integers form an integral domain. It's not very difficult to show that this is the case. If you add or multiply two complex numbers with integral real and imaginary parts, you will end up with again complex numbers of that form. Also, 0 is such a complex number. The additive inverse of such a complex number is also such a complex number, namely the minus of a complex number. Also, complex numbers, the multiplication is commutative. So the ring, this then turns out to be a ring. The ring is a commutative ring. What else is true? Since the complex numbers form a field, this ring is an integral domain. So the same is true for this subset also, Ji. There are no zero divisors. So this indeed is an integral domain. Now our aim is to first of all show that this is not only an integral domain, but this is a Euclidean ring. Okay. we want to turn Ji into a Euclidean ring. For that we need a function d from the non-zero elements of Ji into the set of all integers j such that the following conditions are true, the following hold. Number 1, d of x is greater than or equal to 0 for all x in Ji minus 0. That is, the d should have non-negative integral values. The values are integers, fine, but they have to be non-negative integers. So this d is actually the d function that you have in the definition of a Euclidean ring, because that's the only thing we need in Ji. The other things are already there, it's already an integral domain, so that is the only thing we need extra. Then dx is less than or equal to dxy for all x and y in Ji, both of which are non-zero. That is the first condition for a d function in a Euclidean ring. And the third one also, you know, it's the second condition. For any x and y in Ji where x is non-zero, there exist elements t and r in Ji such that y is equal to tx plus r, where either this element r is 0 or it is non-zero and its d value is strictly less than the d value of x. We want such a function d, we want to find such a function d. For x equal to a plus bi belonging to Ji, we are now going to define the function d. Dx is equal to a square plus b square. So now look at the function. Since x is a Gaussian integer, a and b are integers first of all. So a square plus b square is also an integer. So at least the function d gives us integer values. Moreover, since we have a square plus b square, the least value of this integer, least possible value is 0 when both a and b are 0. That, however, is not possible because I forgot to mention that this is being defined here. We define dx to be equal to a square plus b square. So as I was saying, the dx is an integer, and because of its form it is a non-negative integer. It follows from the definition that dx is greater than or equal to 0 and dx belongs to j is an integer for all x belonging to ji minus 0. So condition 1 is true for this particular d. Next, let x and y be two elements in this set. Okay, so x and y are both non-zero Gaussian integers. Now if you look at dy, we are looking at this real part of y plus I times imaginary part of y. So by definition this is equal to real part of y square plus imaginary part of y square. Now because y itself is non-zero, both real part of y and imaginary part of y are not simultaneously 0. That's why this quantity is greater than 0. And because this quantity is not only greater than 0 but is an integer, so it's a positive integer. So that's why this is greater than or equal to 1. Okay, so we are going to use this fact. Since y is non-zero, we have dy greater than or equal to 1, and so if we multiply on both sides by dx, we will have dx less than or equal to dx times dy, which is equal to dxy. This inequality is obtained by multiplying both sides by dx, and the inequality preserves its direction or sense because dx is a non-negative integer. If we multiply by a negative, then it reverses the inequality. And what about this one? What about this equality? You see, if you look at this definition carefully, okay, let me continue from here. No need to clutter that space. If we look at the definition, we see one more thing, that this dx, the way it has been defined, it is nothing but the square of the absolute value of x. That's what it is. So that's why if we calculate dx dy, it is this. So which turns out to be equal to this from elementary properties of absolute values of complex numbers, and this is d of xy. So that's how we get that equality. So you can see that not only is condition 1 true, but condition 2 has also been seen to be true for this particular d function. Now we are left with showing that this is also true, and that will prove that Ji is indeed a Euclidean ring, and we will do that as a result, and that's the first result of this section. It is theorem. The statement is simple. This is a Euclidean ring. Now we look at the proof. From the above discussion, we have already done part of the job here. We have defined the function d, which has been found to satisfy two of the conditions. We now need to see that it also satisfies the third one. So from the above discussion, we see that in order to show that Ji is a Euclidean ring, the following must be shown. We are now again going to write this because we are writing a proof. For any elements x and y in Ji where x is non-zero, there exist elements t and r in Ji such that y is equal to tx plus r, where either r is 0 or it is non-zero and its d value is strictly less than the d value of x. Now we are going to prove this assertion, but first of all we are going to prove this for a special situation, namely where x is a positive integer, and then with the help of that we are going to handle the general case. We now prove the above assertion in a very special case, namely when x is a positive integer. Let us see for a moment if x can really be a positive integer. X is a, in general, x is a Gaussian integer, which is a complex number with integral real and imaginary parts. So if the real part is there but the imaginary part is 0, then we do have an integer, and that integer, it is given it is non-zero, so there is a possibility that positive integers will arise. So we are considering those cases where x is a positive integer. So assume x is a x is a positive integer. Okay. Now y is a general Gaussian integer, so it will have its own real and imaginary parts. Let y is equal to a plus bi, where a and b are real numbers, right? Then there exist integers u, u1, v and v1 such that a is equal to ux plus u1, b is equal to vx plus v1, absolute value of u1 is less than or equal to x by 2, and absolute value of v1 is less than or equal to x by 2. What is this? What is it that we have written? You see, because y is Gaussian, a and b are ordinary integers, and now x is a positive integer. After all, it's 0. So we have used the ordinary Euclidean algorithm in the ring of integers, which we already have proved. However, this is not the usual version of the Euclidean algorithm. Once we have used it to divide a by x, and once we have divided b by x, but these are not quotient and remainders, because they are somewhat different integers which satisfy this less familiar inequality. But where are we getting this result from? And to justify that, I am going to refer to a result, this. Let me write the reference. See exercise 7 of section 2.1. In bracket I write Barton. There is a very well-known book on elementary number theory. In fact, its title is also Elementary Number Theory by David M. Barton. It's from there we are using an exercise, and that is because it's a book which I am planning to start at some point. We will see elementary number theory just like we are seeing ring theory and analysis. So that like that we are going to start this also. So from there this exercise is there. When we solve that exercise, we will get that this particular assertion, this part is a consequence of that exercise. Okay. Now let T be the complex number u plus vi and R be the complex number u1 plus v1i. Note that T and R both are Gaussian integers because their real and imaginary parts are after all integers. u, v, u1, v1, these are all integers. Then what happens to our y? Y is a plus bi. We now have expressions for a and b, so we can substitute them. u1 plus vx plus v1 I. So this is equal to, if we manipulate this expression a little bit, you will see that it becomes u plus vix plus u1 plus v1i, and that according to the way we have defined T and R, that becomes tx plus r. Okay, so we have been able to express y as tx plus r, where t and r are ji, but the job is not over yet. We have to still prove that either r is 0 or its d value is less than the d value of x. Okay, so let's see how we can do that. Now, if r is non-zero, if r is 0, then of course we are done, we have nothing else to show. If r is non-zero, then according to the definition of D, this is u1 square plus v1 square, because r is u1 plus v1I. And now you look at these inequalities. Absolute value of u1 is u1 and v1 both are less than or equal to x by 2. So this expression will be less than or equal to x square divided by 4 plus x square by 4, which becomes x square by 2, and this is strictly less than x square. Why? Because x is a positive integer. So x square also is a positive integer. So we can multiply both sides of this inequality by x square to get this inequality, strict inequality. And this is nothing but dx. Why? Because you see, if we express x, since x itself is an integer, so x can be expressed as a complex number in this way. So by definition, dx is x square plus 0 square, so this is equal to x square. So we have also shown that either r is 0 or its d value is strictly less than the d value of x. This proves the assertion in the case when x is a positive integer. Now we are going to handle the general case. Now x is no longer necessarily a positive integer. The only thing we know about x is that it's a non-zero Gaussian integer. However, that non-zeroness will be important, since x is non-zero. You look at this number, x times its complex conjugate, which we know is nothing but absolute value of a square of its absolute value, is a positive integer. Okay, so we can use in place of this we can now use what we have proved in the previous paragraph with x bar in place of x, because this is a positive integer. This already is a negative integer, but because of non-zeroness of x, it becomes positive. So by what we have, proved in the previous paragraph, there exist elements t and r in Ji such that, but we are not going to use y as such. In place of y we will use yx bar, which we can do because in place of y we can take any element. The only condition or the only restriction is on x, which has to be non-zero. So we are now sort of dividing yx bar by xx bar. This xx bar is a positive integer now, and that's why we have been able to get t and r, which give us an equation like this, and it is coming from what we have proved in the previous paragraph, where r is either 0 or has d value less than the d value of xx bar. Or d of r is less than d of xx bar. Okay. Okay, now now looking at this equation, we see that we have an expression for r in terms of the other quantities. If we use that expression here, we should get something. Let us see. If r is not equal to 0, then d of y minus tx times d of x bar, since d is a multiplicative function, that is d of these two, this product is equal to d of their product. So this is equal to d of y minus tx times x bar, which is equal to d of yx bar minus txx bar, which from this equation is nothing but r. So this is d of r, and dr from our inequality is d of xx bar. Again, using the multiplicative nature of d, we can write it as this. Okay. Now we want to cancel dx bar from both sides of this inequality, because after all we have what? This quantity, this product is less than, strictly less than this product. Now is dx bar positive? That is the question now. Since x is non-zero, x is non-zero, that we already have. X bar is also non-zero. If a complex number is non-zero, its complex conjugate is also non-zero, and hence dx bar, which is the square of its real part plus the square of its imaginary part, is also non-zero, and since we already know that d values are not just integers, they are non-negative integers, so because of that, if one of them is non-zero, it's a positive integer. This implies dx bar is strictly greater than 0. So from this inequality, y minus tx times dx bar is less than dx bar, we have d of y minus tx is strictly less than dx. Okay, now the Gaussian integer y itself can be written like this: tx plus r naught, where r naught is defined to be y minus tx, which is quite easy to see. And if r naught is y minus tx, then you add tx to that, you get y back. Assume r naught is not equal to 0. Say r naught is non-zero. Okay. Then what